Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Technology Tuesday, hosted by Out of the Box Technology. We're excited to bring you these weekly free webinars that dive a little bit deeper into what we do here at Out of the Box Technology. We also like to take a look at what's going on in and outside of QuickBooks in the industry today, whether it be sales tax or some new great third-party apps that we'd like to bring some information to you about. My name is Jennifer, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm very thrilled to be a part of Technology Tuesdays over the last couple of years, working in business development and customer relationships. It really helps me to just kind of be at the forefront of what's going on here at Out of the Box and talking to you all, our audience, about what we are doing, the different services that we can offer, and just dive a little bit deeper into each of those areas of our expertise. If you have any questions as the presentation is going along today, please feel free to use the chat feature on your GoToWebinar control panel and send those over to me. And I'll be sure to answer them if I can, or present those to Barb as she wraps up her presentation. So in case you haven't heard the news, weeks ago, we had a very exciting announcement here at Out of the Box Technology that we merged with EBS Associates to become one of the largest solution providers for QuickBooks. So it's been a really exciting month, coming on almost a full month now since the merger. So it's really, really great. A lot of awesome things happening here. We're so excited to make the two teams, Out of the Box and EBS, as one, and things have really been going really great. So we're excited about that and are happy to share that with you as well. A little bit more about Out of the Box Technology. If you aren't familiar, we're a QuickBooks training, integration, hosting, and support company. We have consultants on all versions of QuickBooks. We also have a lot of great bookkeepers on our team offering their services. And we have a whole development side of the company that does website design, custom app development, and more. But today what we're going to be talking about is Recur360. Now, Recur360 is an app that our development team created from the ground up, just as a solution to some things that were missing in QuickBooks. So it's an app that integrates with all versions of QuickBooks, online, desktop, whatever you have, we can integrate there. And so about every couple of months, we've been doing these webinars on Recur360 because one of the great things about the fact that we developed it from the ground up with our developers in-house is that we can take the suggestions and comments from you, our users, and make this app better and better all the time. So we like to bring to the forefront things that have changed over the last couple of months, updates that we've made, and all of that. So also, if you're not familiar with QuickBooks or with Recur360, Barb's going to just kind of give a high-level overview of what the app is and how it can be a solution for you. So with that, I am going to hand things over to Barb. Are you there, Barb?
Hi there. Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter. I'm going to stop talking and let you dive right into it. And again, if anyone has questions, go ahead and chat those through. If there's any features specifically you want to see, you can send those over and we'll make sure to touch on that. So Barb, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, as she mentioned, we like to do these updates quarterly just to let you know a lot of the new features that have come out in Recur360, and then also, again, cover some basics in case you're new to the software and have questions and don't know what it is or what it does. So I'm going to actually dive right into the most recent updates first here, because there's a lot of new features that have come on board since we did this back in February. One of the first ones was something I mentioned as an upcoming feature, and that is to be able to see the service date from QuickBooks in our recurring invoices. And that's a QuickBooks desktop feature. So right now, if I go into my QuickBooks desktop file, today, I just made a new invoice for a customer called Barb's Bike Shop, and I have a service invoice in QuickBooks that has the service date on it. And let me make the screen a little bit bigger so you can probably see that column as a date field there. Make this smaller. So I have a service that I performed, and the service date was 5/1. Now, I just made this invoice, and it is not in Recur360 yet because I haven't synced it over. So one of the things about Recur360, as our normal users are used to, if you update or change something directly in QuickBooks, you need to sync that information over to Recur360 if you are using QuickBooks Desktop. We do that by default a few times a day. So you'll see there's a full customer sync that was done on 5/7 at 11:48 this morning prior to me making that invoice. If I need to get that new invoice and that change into Recur360 right now so I can see it, then I would want to tell the system I want to schedule a sync with QuickBooks. That will put an additional task in my list here now instead of me waiting for it to sync that. Now that's a pending task, and I'll go to my QuickBooks Web Connector, check it off and tell it to update the selected, and then I'll go through and do a full sync with my entire customer list from QuickBooks to check for any new invoices, any new payments, any new customers that might have been added since the last time it synced. Once this completes, I'll be able to go over to my customer list and see in my Barb's Bike Shop, I have to wait for that to finish syncing here. My Barb's Bike Shop will show that new invoice and show that service date then. So that's one of the recently added features that just came on board at the end of February this month. And it's kind of been a nice thing for all of our service-based industry people that they can see actively what their service dates were and that they come over into our system. While that is syncing, so it's going to take a few minutes here, but also in Recur360, we have a new setting now under the account for you to be able to sync all your historical invoices. So on a change like that, when I added my additional field here, that was mentioned in recent updates. That's an option that I'm going to need to select here to sync all of that over in from QuickBooks. So that setting was added to be able to bring that historical information in case I had put a service date on any past invoice prior to the update being available. That would go back and check all of those invoices and bring them in. Okay. Now, if I go look at my customer list now and I go to Barb's Bike Shop, I'm able to see there is that invoice that was just created. And if I click on it, then I'm going to be able to see a column here called service date. And that came directly from QuickBooks. So that information now syncs over. So you've got a better match between what Recur360 shows and what QuickBooks shows. Next new feature that we added here, and I'm just kind of working down my list, guys, sorry, is in our recurring invoices options. We've always had the option to be able to do what we call split payment processing on any of our recurring invoices. So I have this cash sale recurring invoice that happens on the 15th day of every month, and it is set to automatically charge that customer's card. I have the option to process that right away. So on the 15th, it's going to do the invoice and charge the customer's card. Or I can process that payment a number of days later. Let's say I want to give them a net 15 terms. So I want to process it 15 days later. But I always want to make sure that it gets processed in the same month that the invoice went out. So the majority of the time that would be okay because it's going to process on the 30th, with the exception of February, which means this payment would process in March instead of February. So we have a new checkbox here that says process this no later than the last day of the month of the invoice. So if I check this, then by default, it does process 15 days after the invoice, but in the month of February, it would still process on February 28th instead of waiting until March to process that. So that way, your payment is going to come in and be applied in the same month as the invoice, as opposed to just the strict 15-day period. Okay. So that's our second big new feature there. we also have added the ability for you to, in many of our data entry fields in Recur360, be able to see fields that were previously masked or encrypted as you're entering things. This applies both in our Recur360 as you're editing a customer and in the pay online links that we send out to customers. So to show you that, and as an example, if I edit my Barb test customer here, and I go to add a new payment method for them, I choose to edit the customer, and I choose to add a new payment method. As I'm typing, my card numbers are going to be encrypted. But once I've typed them all, I can click the show button, and it'll show me the actual numbers that I had entered as a final data entry check before I press the save button. So that way I can see, did I type them all correctly? And before I hit save and accidentally have it tell me that my account number was incorrect. So that's available in the card number field and also in the CVV field, because that is normally an encrypted field as well. So I can click show there, and then I can rehide them. So that show hide button is there in our editing payment details. Anytime you're entering any kind of account information, a credit card number, a routing number, banking number, or CVV number. And as I mentioned, it is also available, I'm going to go back and cancel out of there, in our pay online links. So I'm going to click into this customer here and click their pay online link. If I click the email link button, that will take me to the same page the client gets to. And when they enter a card number, I'm really going to mess that one up, and press the show button, it will show to them as well before they hit the save button. So it's kind of a way for you to double check your entry before you press save and have the system tell you that you entered a number wrong. And that's available in both those areas. Now, next new feature that we have is our Intuit Payments History Sync and Report. So if you have a merchant account that is connected, which is ACH for Intuit, then we have the ability to check the statuses of any of the fundings for your ACH processing. Because as I'm sure most of you who do ACH processing are aware, initially when that payment gets processed, it gets an approval code as long as that bank account is a valid bank account and a valid routing account. So it will appear that that money is applied as a payment right away. But it can take up to 5 days for Intuit to actually fund that payment, because they check to make sure the funds are available, to make sure the customer did not dispute it, and actually put the money in your bank account. So up to 5 days after you process this, it is possible that that ACH may be removed from your account. So we've given you a report now called our ACH history, which is going to show you what the funding status was on each of your ACH transactions. Okay. And in QuickBooks Desktop, we simply are able to sync with it to tell it to get the most current information, and then we have a report on it. I'm also going to change this. I'm going to go connect to one of my Sandbox QuickBooks Online companies, because it's slightly different in how that one works and how that one appears. So under my Intuit Sync statuses, I'm still going to sync the status there. And then I'm going to have a report there as well to show me what that was and how, if my payments got funded or not funded. Okay, so once that stops being green, it'll update my sync history here. The additional things that we have in our QuickBooks Online ACH sync is that, so here, let me pull up the report and show you now that my screen is updated. So here's my funding status here. For QuickBooks Online clients, we have the ability for the system to automatically take an action. Okay, so depending upon those statuses, I can have the system automatically do things. And that is under my account setting. I'm sorry, under my email setting. I'm clicking too many buttons here, guys. Going too fast, sorry. Here's where it is. Under payments, under Intuit settings, I can tell the system to automatically perform a certain activity based on a decline or a void. So if the payment is found to have been voided in your Intuit merchant account, I can ask the system to void it in QuickBooks or delete it from QuickBooks. So delete as if it never happened, it is gone from QuickBooks. So if obviously I've set these kind of backwards here. If a payment's been voided, then most likely I would want to void the payment in QuickBooks as well. And if it's been deleted from my merchant account, then I'd want to go ahead and delete it from QuickBooks. And the last checkbox there is to automatically send an email to the client when that happens to let them know that that invoice was not paid and they need to make a separate new payment for that. So the new feature involved in all of that, guys, was the report, to be able to see that ACH history, to be able to check up on it and see what action was taken if you're QuickBooks Online or what the status was if you're QuickBooks Desktop customer. Okay. Next new feature that we've had some clients ask for is our Intuit single sign-in feature that we have with integrating Recur360 to your QuickBooks file. Many of our clients log in with a single sign-in. They log in with their Intuit account when you initially set up the account instead of having to log in with an email and a password. And I've not set any of mine to actually use that single sign-on feature. But when that does, then you just log into your Intuit account once, and then you can automatically get into Recur360, and it's logged in. The limit to that, obviously, is then anyone that you want to be able to get to Recur360 has to know your Intuit login. And many of our clients who now have help from an accounts receivable person or someone helping them out with Recur360 setup and managing don't want to give that information out or have that be accessible by multiple people. So you have the ability now to unlink that from your Intuit merchant account login, and then it would simply go to you being able to set up an email address and your own password. So it'd separate that for you, and that's an option that you guys can do yourselves now instead of us having to get involved in the backend in the database, which is how we used to do that. Also, please be aware if you do change that setting and you were using the Intuit single sign-on and you're using QuickBooks Desktop, that you are going to have to create an email login and a password. And if you create a different password, you will also need to update that password in your QuickBooks Web Connector, because that has to always be your current Recur360 password. So just remember to update that in both places, please. Okay. Next new option that we have added is if you have any invoice with an open balance currently in Recur360. So in our collection center here, I'll have all of my historical invoices that are not fully paid. And again, these are invoices whether or not they were created in Recur360 by a recurring invoice or directly in QuickBooks independently. So I have an invoice back here from 2017 that is obviously very old. It is 478 days old. If I were to go look at this particular invoice and pull it up on screen, there is an option now for you to be able to establish a recurring payment plan on this invoice. So I can say that I want to make a recurring payment plan on this for this customer to be able to pay. Now, bad example because this is only a $78 invoice, but if this were a $1,000 invoice that this customer is way past due on and I need to go ahead and get it paid, I can set up a payment plan directly from here. And if I choose to do that, then it's automatically selected to that customer and linked to that invoice. And all I have to do is say, okay, I'm going to process this every week on Monday for $50, let's say. And I'm going to link that to your payment form that is stored, and which leads me into my next new feature. This client doesn't have any stored payment methods with me. So now in Recur360, in any of our select a payment method screens, whether you're creating a new recurring invoice, creating a new recurring payment, as I have here right now, or from the collection center, these all have an add new payment method option drop down. And when I select that, I'm able to fill in the new card information. So okay, I'll put in all of their information, including their CVV number. It populated automatically with the name on the card and the address from the customer. And I'd press create. That's going to add that payment method on the fly and allow me to select it here for this recurring payment plan. Okay. Now, once I save that, I am then able to also save this payment plan and know that I have a payment plan scheduled on that particular invoice. So for this client here, I go, look, every 1 week, I'm going to process a $50 payment until that is paid off. Okay. If I happen to look at that invoice as well, down towards the bottom of that screen, I then see that there is a recurring payment set up. So I can click that and see the details of what that payment plan is and what it's going to do. And I can also edit that plan directly from within the invoice screen itself. So kind of an easier way for you guys to manage and quickly resolve this open invoice and set up a payment plan or process a payment to it. Okay. Leading into that as well, from a reporting perspective, I know I can see that recurring payment here on this individual invoice, but if I want to look at all of my upcoming recurring payments, I can do that under the report screen, and I have a report for scheduled payments. So if I click this, I can see my scheduled payments report, and from one list here, see any recurring scheduled payments that I have. Now, this brings up the difference between a scheduled payment and a recurring payment. Because a recurring payment plan is what we just set up. I want to schedule a payment every $50 every 2 weeks against this invoice. That is a recurring payment plan. A scheduled payment is anything that is currently pending in the list of unprocessed payments on either a recurring invoice or a collection invoice that I sent out. So right now, I'm able to see that Bill's Windsurfing Shop has invoice number 1171, and it's an invoice for $760. And on the 10th of this month, I am scheduled to process that payment for them against their Visa card under my authorized.net account. So again, if I look at that particular invoice, I'm able to see down here at the bottom, there's that scheduled payment. That's to pay it for the full amount, because the recurring invoice that created this was set to process the payment a few days after the invoice date. So in this case, must have been 5 days, because the invoice date was 5/5. My payment's going to process on 5/10. So you can also, from that report screen, tell it you want to automatically process that payment. So go back to my scheduled payments report here, and I can process that payment right away, or I can delete that future scheduled payment if the client said they'd like to change how they want to pay for it. You know, they want to do a different payment method. I can delete the scheduled payment, or I can, if they contact me and say, hey, you can go ahead and process it early, I can press the process payment now button, and I can process it to the card that was stored. Or again, here's where my add a new payment method feature comes into play from our collection center. So this particular client has 5 different payment methods stored for them. Okay. they've got the 4 and credit card and ACH, another Visa, a MasterCard. I can do a manual payment, or I can add another payment in here too. So that's the scheduled payments report that gives you the flexibility to see what payments are upcoming that have been pre-scheduled. Okay. We added some new columns to our other screens there. So that payment was successful. Now it's going to go out of my scheduled payments report screen. So now it's gone. So next new feature is some of our new columns that have been added to different screens, a few screen changes. In our customer screen now, we have separate columns for the first name of the customer and the last name of the customer. Makes it easier to kind of sort and search and find things. And that's available in our customer screen as well as our collection screen here. So my collection screen is also going to show my first name and my last name. Okay, and those are 2 places for that. Next feature that I want to talk about is some historical kind of data cleanup information here. And that is traditionally, if you had QuickBooks connected and you had a $0 invoice, those didn't automatically come over because they didn't show as a balance due and they didn't come in as historical invoices for us. So we have updated that feature, and now if you create a $0 invoice in QuickBooks, or if you've received full payment in QuickBooks for that, they will now sync over into Recur360. So your customer view here in Recur360 is always going to match what you have in QuickBooks then. So any invoices here are all going to show, even if they were a $0 invoice. Okay. Next new feature is ability to do partial payments. So back to our collection center here, we had a lot of requests because currently when you send a pay online link to a client, they have the ability to pay one invoice, multiple invoices, or parts of invoices. So bad example for this client here, let me pull up a client that has an actual balance due. So a good one would be, I want to show one that's got multiples. My Bill's Windsurfing Shop client. Right now they've got a lot of open invoices for me. And if I email them a link, they're going to see their open invoices along with the amounts of those invoices. And they can pay the full invoice just by checking it, or they can pay just part of an invoice. If they check it and they say they only want to pay $20 towards that invoice, they have that option in the pay online link always. We've added that option for you as well in the collection center. So if I go to my collection center here, I can't pay multiple invoices currently, but I do have the ability to say that I want to process payment on, let me pick one with a large balance so it looks easy and I can show you. If I press process payment here for Travis, I can process part of that now within the Recur360 screen. So previously you could only pay the full balance due, but now we will allow you to put a partial payment in. So I want to pay $150 towards check that he sent me. There we go. I'll put in the check number and then I'll process the payment and leave the remaining balance as an open balance for you. Send an email to the client automatically and then everything is updated. So we previously had coached people that they could click the pay online link automatically and pay it from within there, but then you had to be able to enter the card number and card information. So we made it a little bit easier from the collection center to be able to process a partial payment on any of your open invoices there. Okay. And when you are entering any new credit card information for a client, so let's add another process of payment for, let's say, Paulson Medical Supplies here. I'm going to press process payment here because his ACH didn't go through. I'm going to add a new payment method for him. And in any of the adding a new payment method screens, we have a checkbox now to apply that payment method to all. Now, what that check mark means is any current recurring invoice that this customer has, this will now be saved as what to use as the payment method on that recurring invoice. Okay, so whether or not that invoice had a payment method stored, it's going to add it or change the current one to update it to this method. So where everyone needs to be careful with that is, let's say that particular client, as an example, I know my Bill's Windsurfing Shop client has multiple recurring invoices. So when I add that payment method for them, if I go back to this particular client and pull up his screen, we'll go edit him so you can see the recurring invoices that are set up under his account. I can see right now that he's got one for $760 and one for $85. Okay. When I edit this customer and add a new payment method for him, if my screen will come up, I'm going to be able to add that payment method, and I'll show you what happens when you check the box to automatically update all of them. So I'll scroll down here to the bottom. I'll add another new payment method. Okay, put in my CVV number, put in my card number. Check the Apply to All button. And then when I save and sync that, that will automatically apply that particular payment. Card number is invalid. I should have checked my card number before I did that. Let's add another one. Okay. Apply to all. Save and sync that. Oh, I didn't pick an expiration date. That's okay. It had all my information saved. I'll just update the expiration year, save and sync that. And then we'll go look at the recurring invoices so you can see that those updated automatically, because it updated both of those with one step. So if you have a client that has different payment methods for different types of recurring invoices, you're not going to want to use that Apply to All button, because there is the new Visa card that I just added. It's going to process it 7 days later. And if I go back and look at the customer for his other recurring invoice, it's going to have that same payment method stored on it as well. Okay. So when I edit this one, that's also saved as his payment method for that recurring invoice. So both of those got updated with one option. Okay. And then the last new feature that I want to talk about is something that was requested heavily by our QuickBooks Desktop customers. In Recur360, as we automatically generate recurring invoices, if they are checked to email that recurring invoice to the customer through Recur360, we send this email as soon as we create the recurring invoice. But because the customer doesn't automatically, because that invoice doesn't automatically sync to QuickBooks right away, it puts it in that queue for the web connector to process it. We do not know when we initially create that recurring invoice what the QuickBooks invoice number is going to be. So by default, when this goes out, let me go back to my QuickBooks Desktop connected account so you can see that from that perspective. When this invoice initially goes out, it's not going to have a QuickBooks invoice number by default. Okay, so if I choose to email this to the client, then they get an invoice, which if I go back and I can show you a sample one that I have here. Let me go look at my screen and I'll bring up one of my sample emails from past. So one of my OTTB testings. Okay. This was an invoice that was sent from Recur360. And when it gives the invoice detail here, it gives you the invoice date, the fact that it was paid with a Visa, the Recur360 transaction ID, and their customer account number. Also, the attached PDF that you can see has the Recur360 transaction ID, but does not yet have a QuickBooks invoice number. Okay. That is how we've always sent things out of Recur360. We had a lot of customers who wanted to be able to reference that QuickBooks invoice number directly on that initial email that went out. So there is a new flag now in our email option to be able to not send that invoice email until after the invoice has synced over to QuickBooks and the invoice number has been assigned by QuickBooks. So what happens in that case? Recur360 goes ahead overnight and generates that recurring invoice, but then it does not send the email until the web connector has run and it's processed that invoice into QuickBooks and had the invoice number assigned. And let me show you how that happens. So right now, I'm going to go into my recurring invoices screen here, and I'm going to, since I have that check mark set already, I'm going to backdate one of these recurring invoices to make it happen right away. So I'm going to click the view details on this particular recurring invoice. I'm going to change the start date to, since this one happens on the 1st of every 2 months, I'm going to go ahead and set it back 2 months. So right now, this screen at the top right is always going to tell me when this is going to run next. So automatically overnight, which is technically tomorrow morning on 5/8, this is going to run one time and then reset the next date to 7/1. So if I press the submit button now, overnight it's going to generate that recurring invoice. However, I don't want to wait. So this is the case where I'm going to use my push transactions button to have it go check all of my recurring invoices and make that one that it knows is past due. So that's going to go ahead and generate that recurring invoice for me. And it's going to put it into my sync status as an invoice that's pending to post over to QuickBooks. So no email will go out when this happens here. Once this green goes away, I'll be able to see the status then, and I'll show you in my sync status where it goes and what happens. So I just want to wait for that to finish processing. I have a few invoices in here that it's checking. I've got a list of 21 here. It's not too bad, but want to make sure it goes ahead and finishes processing that before I show you the sync status here. So once that green goes away, I'll be able to see that. Let me go ahead and come on. Now I can see. So I can see it's already generated the invoice on the Recur360 side and the payment on the Recur360 side. However, no email has gone out. So if I go in and look at this recurring invoice that it made in Recur360, I will see here that it has not been assigned an invoice number. So it says QuickBooks invoice number pending sync. And it also in the invoice emails, it says delivery status pending QuickBooks sync. So this email has not gone out yet. Now, if I go into my web connector, which I just minimized here, so let me go find you again. So if I go update my web services within QuickBooks, and I tell it I want to update the selected right now, now it's going to push that invoice into QuickBooks. And then my email will automatically send. As soon as that happens, as soon as we get the invoice number back from the web connector, that email goes out with the invoice number included now. So that's processing and getting everything back. My sync status is updating over here. One thing left, so that's gone out. So now if I go look again at that recurring invoice here, I'm able to see now that the invoice number has been assigned and that email was sent. And I just got an email in my Outlook, open that up, that shows me that new invoice and that it was paid. and does show the QuickBooks invoice number on it. So that was a very highly requested feature that's now available in Recur360 there. So that's for my QuickBooks desktop customers only, because QuickBooks Online, we send those over immediately into QuickBooks, get the invoice number back immediately. So all of those invoices always go out with their invoice number assigned automatically. Okay. So that is a highlight, everybody, of all of our new features that we've released. I always like to mention at the end of this, too, what we're working on and what our upcoming features are going to be. May's been a busy month for us already because this is part of our Intuit recertification every year. We have to go through an annual certification with Intuit in order to be listed in their apps, to be able to certify that our application works properly and links properly and connects properly to QuickBooks. So we've been going through that. But in addition to that, we're also adding 2 major new features that we're working on. One of them is to be able to create and add sub-users within Recur360. Currently, right now, in Recur360, everybody shares that same login. Everyone can log in from multiple locations at the same time with the same email address and the same password. And everybody has the same access to all the features of the software. But we're going to be adding the ability for you to add sub-users into the system where you could create a second user with their own login and their own password. And we're also going to give you the ability to grant permissions to those users. As an example, if you wanted to have a person who was just able to see the collection center, we did not want them to be able to edit or see the recurring invoices that were coming up, but you wanted them to be able to process payments on current open invoices. You could restrict their permissions to only being able to see that area of the software. And then the second feature is going to be a big one for us, is to be able to create a one-time invoice easily within Recur360. I haven't seen what the feature is going to look like yet, but currently, if you want to create what we call a one-time invoice in Recur360, we coach people to set it up as a new recurring invoice that recurs daily every 1 day and ends after 1 occurrence. So there's a few extra setup steps involved in creating a one-time, on-demand kind of an invoice in the software currently. But we're working on the ability for you to be able to create that in a cleaner screen without having to set it up as a recurring invoice. So those are our 2 big new feature add-ons, and obviously we'll always have other enhancements and features that come on board as well, mostly driven by our customer demand. So things that people have asked us for, we definitely keep a list of, and as we can, we incorporate them into the software. Lastly, Jennifer, I'm not sure if there's been any questions or anything so far, but I can kind of touch on some Recur360 basics for anybody who is new to the software and hasn't really delved into how to set things up or what features we have.
Yeah, so Barb, we do have a couple questions that have come in as you've gone over these new features. So let's hit those, and then if we have a few minutes, you can kind of show some other high-level things, if that's okay?
Sure.
Okay, so our first question here is, and I think you touched on this a little bit, but just to revisit, is there a way to send past due emails to a client with invoices created in QuickBooks?
Yes. So any of your invoices, whether they were created in QuickBooks directly or created by Recur360, are going to show up in our collection center here. So this is all of my open invoices. So I can very quickly, I can see that my Rick Humphreys customer has this invoice due for $53.75. I can send him this invoice right away one time right now and choose to send it immediately. Or also one of the powerful features of Recur360 is I can schedule this for later and schedule it not only to send right away, but schedule it to send every 2 days, every 1 day, beginning 1 day after the due date until it gets paid off. So anytime you send the invoices from Recur360 here, as long as you have enabled the pay online link to be available to them, the invoice that they're going to get looks similar to that one that I had showed you earlier. So they get a copy fully branded with your logo, with you, thank you for doing business. Here's the line items that were on their invoice, and here is their pay online link. And then as they click the pay online link, they always see all of their open invoices. So even though I sent one email for that one particular invoice, when they click the pay online link, they're going to see all their open invoices here, as well as they also see how old these invoices are. He can tell that this particular invoice is 156 days old. So he's got kind of his own view of an aging on his invoices.
Perfect, thank you. The next question is, when you're updating credit card information, can you update just the expiration date and not the card number or any other information?
No, any edits to card information from Recur360 require you to re-enter all of the card information. So the card number, CVV, expiration date, and year all have to be re-entered.
Okay, great, thank you. There's probably some security behind that as well, right?
Exactly, yes.
Great. Can you show the ad processing fee line item for a recurring invoice?
I'm guessing the person is asking about being able to add a credit card processing fee to an invoice. Where that feature would be, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think you're correct in that, yep.
Okay. We don't add those automatically as a, if a customer happens to pay with a credit card, it's not going to build in, say, a 3% fee or whatever fee you want to charge them for using a credit card as a convenience fee. However, what you could do is either if you know that client on the recurring invoice is going to be paying with a credit card, or if you have a client who says they'd like to pay with a credit card, you can add it as a line item. So in this particular recurring invoice, I can edit that recurring invoice, and then I have to have a line item, and this one's set to, let me do one that's really doing a credit card so it's a real world example. So I have a client here, this one that's going to my cash sale that's using a credit card. So in this recurring invoice, I have quite a few line items on it, and I actually did add a fee in here. Now, this fee was set up in QuickBooks, and it was set up as a percentage. So it was set up to be 5% of the line item above it. And this is actually a good example of how it would have to look from the Recur360 side if you would like to charge 5% on all of your line items. Now, I actually did this as a test for a customer who wanted to do a 10% discount and a 5% processing fee. So there are actually two things in play here. So I have my line item for services performed. Then I added a month-to-month item that gave 10% off of the item above it. And I also added a CC fee that took 5% on top of that 125. So I'm giving them a discount and then charging them a fee. So you have to add that as a new line item here. And as I said, let me add another line item. So I'm going to add a line item for a, let's do a service item for 125. We'll add that line item, and then we'll add a new item in here called my CC fee. There's my credit card processing fee, and it's going to charge 5%, so that'll be $625 of the line item directly above it. And that's going to do that. And the way those were set up in my QuickBooks file, if I go look at my lists and I go look at my item list, I have an item for CC fee, and it's set up as a service in QuickBooks, and it is set up to charge a rate of 5%. But as I mentioned, those are things that you have to add up front to the recurring invoice, or if it is for an open invoice that a customer received from you and you want to add that on. So I've got this particular customer here for, let's say, Rick Humphreys for this invoice. If I wanted to add that credit card processing fee to an open existing invoice, I have to edit that invoice within QuickBooks and add the fee and then sync it over to Recur360. So if I were to go into Rick Humphreys here as a customer, and back here in QuickBooks, I want to go to my Customer Center and go find Rick Humphreys. And I want to add it to, let's say, this invoice here. In QuickBooks, I would add that CC fee. So that's going to add $2.50. I'd save and close that. Clear limits, do I want to use that? No. Okay. And then I would have to schedule a sync with Recur360 to tell it to update that invoice total. And then I can process it. So I press sync with QuickBooks. It's going to go ahead and add that sync request here as soon as that finishes processing. Okay. And I would go to the web connector, say that I want to update that. And then what invoice number was that? That was invoice number 162. So we'll check invoice number 162 once that sync status finishes. And then I would be able to process it from within Recur360. So it's a few steps to add a credit card processing fee to an open invoice, but it can be done. Has to be done in QuickBooks.
Great. Thanks for walking us through that, Barb. That was really helpful.
Sure.
So my next question that I have here in the queue is, when a new payment method is added, why aren't the old payment method options deleted?
Because we keep them for future use, just in case a customer would like to have, because they can have multiple payment methods, as I mentioned, for different recurring invoices. So just because I have added a new one doesn't necessarily mean that I want to unlink all the other ones to their recurring payments. They might be using them on different other recurring invoices. You can clean them up under the customer list and manually go delete a payment, but we never automatically delete them as you add new. So you'd have to come in and edit the customer here and say you want to delete that payment method.
Okay, great. The last question that I have, and if there are more out there, please continue to type those in. But the next question I have is, can customers use this to print old invoices if they've already been paid? Maybe like a receipt or just something for the records.
Yes, they sure can. It's a two-step process for them. So they would click the Pay Online link for either the existing invoice that you just sent them, or anytime they had gotten an invoice from you, anytime they click the Pay Online link, they see their open active invoices. And this customer, I don't have my past invoices, but let me see if I've got another customer in here for my sandbox company that I can show a past. And I, of course, clicked it twice. So I've got everybody set to only show active invoices. There's a feature in Recur360 to tell it that you only want to be able to show them active invoices. If I enable, and this is my OTB company, I like to show, I want to allow them to view past invoices. That option has to be checked in your Pay Online link. And then if that client has historical, here, this is a good example. My Steiner Corporation has quite a few open invoices, but they can also see their past fully paid invoices here, and they would need to email it to themselves. That's going to send them an email with that particular invoice and a full-blown PDF that they could print. So every invoice that gets emailed to them goes out with a full PDF copy. And that's my card need updating. So when they get that, they can go to that invoice PDF and print it from there. So they need to email it to themselves, but then yes, they can reprint it.
Great. Then can they keep that link to keep logging in, or each time you have to send a new link?
No, that link works for any invoices that they have, and they can see their full account information always in there.
Great. Excellent. Well, that is all the questions that have come in. We've got about 5 or so more minutes. Barb, do you have like your favorite feature or your favorite aspect of Recur360 that we haven't gone over yet today that you want to kind of showcase, or is there something that you think everyone really should know about the app?
Well, I think one of the biggest questions I always get is one of our newer features and how people put things into the system as far as the difference between what is a recurring invoice versus what is a recurring payment. Because they get to be a little bit confusing in their initial terminology. I have quite a few people who want to just set up recurring payments and put in people's credit card information and charge them $500 per month. Realizing that what that is going to do is, yes, that is going to process that customer's credit card for $500 for that month, but all that does is post a payment into QuickBooks, okay? It does not send any invoice or any revenue generating document into QuickBooks. So I always question people who only set up recurring payments to make sure that they're realizing that, yes, that will post a payment into QuickBooks for you. And if that's what you intended, that's great. But you also need to make the invoice side of that as well. Whether you're doing that manually in QuickBooks using something else, or you have a program that feeds into your QuickBooks invoice information, that's great. And that way the payment posts in, and then you can just link the payment to the invoice that's already in QuickBooks. So that's a good use for recurring payments on its own. But if you would like something that's going to process for the item and do the payment together, then what you're really setting up is a recurring invoice, potentially with the payment linked to it. So generally speaking, most people would want to create a recurring invoice here to invoice for the actual line items for that customer and then process the payment with that. So it's two of those together is a recurring invoice with payment. And then leading into that as well, some of the power of Recur360 being able to do the recurring invoices in here, one of my favorite things for a service-based industry is I don't have to make this description generic like you do in QuickBooks, or have to worry about editing it to put in a date field in this if I want to get this customized for that customer. So in my description field here, yes, this says phone support labor billed in 15-minute increments. I can also put in here, this is for period covering, and have the system automatically put in the invoice date. And I only want to put that in once. I double clicked on it, sorry. And then the day before the next invoice date. So the customer is going to get their description on their services every month that says it's phone support for the month of 6/1 to 6/30/2019. And it does that automatically then every month. I don't have to worry about updating that and letting the client know what the coverage period was for that invoice. It does it automatically without me having to change anything. Well, that's kind of two of my big, customizable, easy, quick things for Recur360. A ton of other things like prorating invoices and stuff like that, that if you have questions on, you can always open a support, or we have other questions.
Nope, that really covers, I think, everything and takes us to the top of our hour. I did want to mention to everyone on the line that several months ago, Barb did do a great presentation with us that really just dives into Recur360. It was our first one that we did. So it does go into just sort of the main and basic features of the app. So following this presentation, everyone will get a link to that if you wanted to view it. Alternatively, like Barb said, there is a support chat on our website that you have. If you have questions, you can submit those there. And then you can also email us. I'll share my contact information at the end. If you wanted your own personal demo of the app, we can schedule that as well, so you can see really how it will work specifically for your business and how you can really dive into it. So Barb, thank you so much for showing us the updates. Again, I think that's a great feature and aspect of us developing this app ourselves, is that we do listen to our customers and hear what you're saying. And if there's something that you want to see put into the app, we do our very best to make that happen if it's realistic. And of course, if there's a lot of people asking for the same thing, we really try our best to get that implemented. So thank you, Barb, for sharing all of that with us today. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
So with that, I am going to take things back, Barb. Again, thank you all so much for joining us. This session is being recorded, so if you needed to go back and watch anything, take a look at some of the features that Barb went into, you'll receive a link to that, as well as I'll point you to where you can find some other demos that we've done on Recur360. So thank you all for joining us. A little heads up, next week we have Sharon Horger on the line with us. She's going to be talking about the bookkeeping services that out-of-the-box technology can offer to your team. And then we have a whole list going on almost into the summer of free webinars. So we hope that you can join us. You can register for free on our website. Thank you all for joining. If you have any questions, like I said, you can contact me right here and I'll point you in the right direction, either to Barb or try to answer your questions as best I can. So thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful day. We'll see you again next week.